Kim Jong Un observes his nation's most sophisticated warship preparing for its inaugural launch ceremony. The anticipated debut of North Korea's Revolutionary Navy vessel concluded in catastrophic failure as his brand-new destroyer sank directly before his eyes. This unprecedented maritime disaster unfolded over the course of 7 critical minutes. Here's the detailed account of how North Korea's naval flagship became a devastating $500 million catastrophe that would shake the regime's military confidence to its core. The morning of October 15th begins with great anticipation at Chongjin harbor. At precisely 10:47 a.m., the elaborate ceremony commences with military fanfare and pageantry. A massive 5,000-ton destroyer sits majestically on specialized launching rails, completely prepared for its historic maiden voyage into the waters. Supreme Leader Kim Jong Un stands proudly alongside high-ranking military officials and naval commanders, confidently expecting yet another triumphant demonstration of North Korean engineering prowess and military advancement. The morning of October 15th begins with great anticipation at Chongjin harbor. At precisely 10:47 a.m., the elaborate ceremony commences with military fanfare and pageantry. A massive 5,000-ton destroyer sits majestically on specialized launching rails, completely prepared for its historic maiden voyage into the waters. Supreme Leader Kim Jong Un stands proudly alongside high-ranking military officials and naval commanders, confidently expecting yet another triumphant demonstration of North Korean engineering prowess and military advancement. The atmosphere is electric with excitement as cameras roll and officials gather. This moment represents years of secretive development and enormous financial investment. The Choe Hyon-class destroyer represents the pinnacle of North Korean naval engineering, designed to project power far beyond coastal waters. Military bands play ceremonial music while workers make final preparations. The ship gleams in the morning sunlight, its hull freshly painted and missile systems clearly visible, ready to make maritime history. At exactly 10:52 a.m., something begins to go terribly wrong with the carefully orchestrated launch sequence. The first signs of trouble emerge as technical difficulties become apparent to the observing crowd. Let's examine precisely what happened during these crucial moments. The transport system that was supporting the massive ship's stern section unexpectedly detaches from its secure position. This critical failure immediately sets in motion a chain of catastrophic events that will unfold rapidly. The enormous destroyer begins sliding uncontrolled into the harbor waters, defying all safety protocols and launch procedures. The massive warship moves with frightening momentum, completely beyond human control or intervention. Engineers and technicians watch helplessly as their years of meticulous work transforms into a nightmare scenario. The ship's movement creates ominous groaning sounds as metal strains against metal. Spectators begin to realize this is not part of the planned ceremony, and tension fills the AI at by 10:54 a.m. Kim Jong Un clearly realizes this launch is not proceeding according to the carefully rehearsed plan. His facial expression changes from confident anticipation to growing concern and visible alarm. Emergency response crews immediately scramble into action as the massive ship tilts at an increasingly dangerous and unstable angle. The Supreme Leader's entourage begins moving frantically, trying to assess the rapidly deteriorating situation while maintaining some semblance of control over the unfolding disaster. Military officials rush to implement emergency protocols as the situation spirals beyond their control. Communication devices crackle with urgent messages between various response teams. The destroyer continues its uncontrolled descent toward the water, gathering dangerous momentum. Safety barriers that were meant to contain spectators now seem inadequate for this unprecedented emergency. Camera operators continue filming despite the chaos, capturing every moment of what was supposed to be a glorious triumph. 10:58 a.m. The fundamental laws of physics become catastrophically apparent as engineering limitations reach their breaking point. The massive ship's stern section enters the harbor water while the bow section remains stubbornly locked to the dock infrastructure. This creates an impossible structural situation that no warship was ever designed to withstand. The 5,000-ton vessel literally begins tearing itself apart under the immense stress and conflicting forces acting upon its hull and framework. The sound of rending metal echoes across the harbor as the destroyer's structural integrity fails completely. Rivets pop like gunshots while steel plates buckle under tremendous pressure. The ship's sophisticated missile systems and electronic equipment are subjected to forces far beyond their design specifications. Workers and officials flee the immediate area as debris begins falling. The carefully planned ceremony has transformed into a dangerous emergency evacuation scenario requiring immediate response. By 11:05 a.m., the naval disaster reaches its devastating conclusion as North Korea's most advanced warship lies completely on its side in Chongjin Harbor. The destroyer that was meant to project strength and technological superiority now represents one of the most expensive military failures in the nation's history. Within mere hours of the catastrophe, blue tarps are hastily deployed to cover the wreckage, attempting to hide this profound embarrassment from international satellite surveillance and intelligence gathering. This catastrophic event occurred at the Chongjin shipyard, located in northeastern North Korea along the coast. Unlike a successful launch that had taken place just weeks earlier at the Mompa facility, this particular shipyard lacked the proper infrastructure necessary for such an ambitious undertaking. The contrast between these two facilities would prove to be a critical factor in understanding why this launch failed so spectacularly while the previous one had succeeded without incident. The fundamental difference lay in the infrastructure capabilities of each facility. The Chongjin shipyard had no floating dry dock like the sophisticated one that had been used successfully at Nammo for previous launches. Instead, the engineers attempted an extremely risky sideways launch methodology, a technique that had never been successfully employed for ships of this enormous size in North Korean naval history. This decision would prove to be fatally flawed from the beginning. This wasn't merely any ordinary naval vessel that met its demise in the harbor. The Choe Hyon-class destroyer was equipped with 82 advanced missile launch cells, state-of-the-art Russian radar systems, and nuclear-capable cruise missiles that represented years of international cooperation and development. This warship was specifically designed and built to transform North Korea from a limited coastal navy into a legitimate regional maritime threat capable of projecting power across vast ocean distances under normal circumstances. Ship launches require absolutely precise coordination between all mechanical systems and human operators. Every single support mechanism must release simultaneously in perfect harmony to ensure a successful launch. When this critical synchronization fails to occur, the resulting forces can literally tear apart even the most robustly constructed warship. The physics involved are unforgiving, and there is no margin for error in these complex operations. Here's exactly what went catastrophically wrong during the Chongjin launch sequence. The crucial support units positioned under the ship's stern section either became caught on the launching rails or fell off entirely during the critical release phase. This mechanical failure created dangerously uneven forces acting across the destroyer's impressive 142-meter length, setting up the conditions for structural failure that would prove impossible to overcome. As naval expert Carl Schuster explained in his detailed analysis, when part of the ship moves but the rest doesn't, the stress will warp the hull, induce cracks, and possibly lead to a snapped keel. This professional assessment perfectly describes the catastrophic forces that acted upon the North Korean destroyer during those fatal minutes. The ship was essentially fighting against itself, with different sections moving in conflicting directions under enormous gravitational and mechanical stresses. Kim Jong Un immediately declared the devastating disaster to be a criminal act caused by what he termed absolute carelessness on the part of the engineering and construction teams. His anger was swift and decisive, reflecting the enormous political embarrassment this failure represented for his regime. Within just a few days of the catastrophic launch, a wave of arrests began targeting those officials and engineers who were deemed responsible for this unprecedented maritime disaster. The purge began with Chief Engineer Kang Jong-kol, who was arrested and charged with gross negligence and failure to properly oversee the launch procedures. Hull workshop head Choe Hyon-class was also arrested for his role in the structural failures that led to the disaster. Deputy Manager Kim Jong-class faced similar charges as the regime sought to assign blame for this costly and embarrassing failure. These arrests sent a clear message about accountability in North Korean military projects. North Korean state media immediately launched a propaganda campaign claiming that underwater inspections had revealed no holes in the warship's bottom section. They insisted that the structural damage was not serious and could be easily repaired. This official narrative was clearly designed to minimize the perceived impact of the disaster and maintain the regime's reputation for military competence. However, international observers had access to much more accurate information. Satellite imagery and intelligence analysis told a completely different story about the true extent of the damage. South Korean and United States intelligence agencies confirmed that the launch had failed catastrophically, with structural damage far more severe than North Korean officials were willing to admit publicly. These independent assessments painted a picture of a warship that was essentially a total loss despite official claims to the contrary. In typical fashion, Kim Jong Un issued an impossible order demanding that the destroyed ship be completely restored and operational by the following month. This unrealistic timeline demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of the complex engineering required to repair such massive structural damage. The supreme leader's demand reflected the political pressure to minimize the disaster's impact rather than any realistic assessment of what was technically feasible. The harsh reality is that North Korea lacks the sophisticated floating dry docks that would be absolutely necessary to even lift a 5,000-ton warship for comprehensive repairs. As retired South Korean Admiral Kim Duk-ki explained, it's easy to repair a ship in a dry dock after draining the water, but they don't have the facility. This infrastructure limitation makes any meaningful repair virtually impossible given the current state of North Korean naval facilities. This maritime disaster reveals the significant gap between North Korean military propaganda and the harsh realities of their actual technical capabilities. The failure was documented in real time by multiple international intelligence agencies, making it impossible to completely hide or minimize. What was originally intended to be a powerful demonstration of military strength instead became a clear illustration of serious technical limitations and infrastructure deficiencies. The incident perfectly illustrates a fundamental problem with authoritarian military development programs worldwide. Political pressures and demands for rapid results often create dangerous technical shortcuts that compromise safety and reliability. Engineers and technical experts may feel compelled to proceed with risky operations rather than delay projects that have high political visibility and importance to regime leadership and national prestige. The international maritime community took note of this disaster as a case study in launch failures. Naval architects worldwide analyzed the available footage and satellite imagery to understand the technical failures involved. This incident became a teaching example of why proper infrastructure and careful adherence to established procedures are absolutely critical for complex naval operations regardless of political pressures or timeline demands. Today, the partially submerged destroyer remains exactly where it sank in Chongjin harbor, still covered by those blue tarps that were hastily deployed to hide the embarrassment. The wreckage serves as a constant reminder of the disaster and the limitations of North Korean naval ambitions. Local harbor operations have been significantly impacted by the presence of this massive obstacle in their waters. The incident highlights the complex challenges that inevitably arise when ambitious military projects encounter the unforgiving realities of complex engineering requirements. Political will and determination, while important, cannot substitute for proper technical infrastructure, adequate expertise, and careful attention to safety protocols. These fundamental requirements cannot be bypassed regardless of political pressure or timeline constraints that leadership may impose. The 7 minutes that were originally meant to showcase impressive naval advancements and technological progress instead became a powerful reminder of what happens when ambition exceeds capability. This disaster demonstrated that successful military modernization requires much more than just political determination and financial resources. It demands proper infrastructure, technical expertise, and respect for established engineering principles. International naval experts continue to study this incident as an example of how political pressure can lead to catastrophic technical failures. The North Korean destroyer disaster has become a case study taught in maritime engineering schools worldwide. It serves as a warning about the dangers of rushing complex military projects without adequate preparation, proper facilities, and sufficient technical expertise to support ambitious goals. The legacy of this naval disaster extends far beyond the immediate financial loss and political embarrassment. It represents a fundamental lesson about the relationship between political ambition and engineering reality. While North Korea continues to pursue military modernization, this incident serves as a sobering reminder that technological advancement cannot be achieved through force of will alone, but requires patient development of both human expertise and physical infrastructure to support complex military capabilities.